Cool. Well, hello everyone. Nice to meet you guys. My name is Jeffrey, as you said. So this class is going to be like setting up the Alexa Mini. Actually want to go a little bit over generalized in working in this environment in the upstate, kind of what does it look like to work with equipment that's probably beyond what you're owning. So something like an Alexa Mini, most of the time that's probably not going to be owned by very many of the individuals. So it's going to be a type of a piece of equipment that you're probably not going to have very much hands-on with, which is a common thing in the industry is equipment that you don't personally own that you're going to be stepping up into. So what does it look like to be prepared on something that you're like, oh, I haven't touched it before? The first time I worked with an Alexa Mini, I was so nervous. So when I went up, I had a shoot up in Charlotte, and the DP asked me, hey, can you go pick up the camera, get all the stuff, make sure it's ready to go? I was like, sure, I can. And I showed up and I literally was sweating bullets. It should have been a 5-minute like pick up, walk and go out. I think I spent 2 hours over there being like, oh my gosh, does it have this? Does it have that? And he gave me like a list of all the stuff. And those guys, they probably thought I was the biggest fool over there. But all that said, something like that, it's a perfect opportunity of being able to, when you have the time, they actually went through and they helped build out the camera with me before I took off so I could know everything. Because the biggest thing, especially with electronics, I don't know if you guys have ever encountered this, all it takes is one $2 cable for nothing to work. For $50,000 of equipment not to work, it just takes one cable. So it's being very well organized and actually understanding what the progress is. So a little bit about the content of what we're going to be going through. I'll give my background on myself. Working as within like a camera team unit, and that can be whether it's just like 2 of you guys or whether that's getting up to crews of like 20 people. The same principles apply. I think one of the things to say is that even if you're working on a small crew, you should have the mentality as well as if you want to be able to get to a bigger spot, you should be working with the mentality on a small crew, even if it's a short film and stuff of I'm going to try to figure out how to move myself forward in that way. We'll go through the body and the functions on the Alexa Mini, what it's got. It's kind of a little bit more bare bones camera compared to some other cinema cameras. I'll actually build out and rig up the camera. We're gonna have that camera rolling and we'll show it on the screen because unfortunately it's a very tactile thing to be able to put together the camera. So like you watching it is very hard for you to still do it. However, hopefully with some of the close-ups and stuff, honestly, if you were to get in an environment where somebody asked you to set up a camera, I would go find some YouTube videos beforehand, have it on hand, have it ready to reference, but hopefully this can still help you get an idea. Some of the external gear like the wireless HDMI, wireless follow focus, so we'll go over what some of the exterior things would be on the camera unit. I'll go through a little bit of the operation and the menus on it. It's not going to get too in depth on there because it won't be super helpful. And then any questions that you have. So personal background. So I started off over in LA. Funny enough, I started off as a stunt performer over there. So I used to do martial arts, acrobatics. My one claim to fame is I got to work on a Jurassic Park video game, which was the last one that company made. So I don't know what that says about me. But I got to do motion capture for that. So I started off on kind of more camera side. And very quickly figured out, oh, the only people that I see working all the time are the crew. So I kind of over like 3 or 4 years kind of started moving over to the crew side. And so I've been doing that for over 10 years now. I don't have like a traditional training process. Like I didn't go through like the LA system. Most of the stuff that I ever worked on when I was over there was indie stuff, like 1 or 2 union shoots. But I never even got my union card or anything. So essentially all the experience I have is from working on shoots, working with some like legitimate people. However, like I haven't gone through like the normal systems of people. So there's some gaps that I might have, but sometimes you being able to work through all that stuff on your own can actually help out quite a bit. So some of the general things I actually want to cover if you are going to work on a camera team is there's 2 things that I would expect. So especially me, because I try to operate as a DP as often as I can, is that you're relying on, especially when you start getting up to like cinema cameras, you can't do it. You almost can't do it by yourself. It's kind of able to, however, there's so many moving pieces. There's so much going on. You really have to have a team. So they're kind of designed and they're built around the operation of the idea of you are relying on other people to do that. So I just kind of want to cover that concept of if you do get onto a set and you are part of a camera team, some of the expectations are going to be that you should have at least a working knowledge of what some of this stuff is. So you need to find out like what camera they're working with. You should probably try to watch a few videos about it. Maybe even just go on a website like B&H or whatever. They're going to have that little list. And it gets really technical, and a lot of the stuff is not going to register. Like you might read over that list of all the items on B&H and stuff and be like, I don't know what all this stuff is. But at least like getting to skim over it when somebody's on set and they're saying something, it might remind you of something that you watched on a video or you did something. I would say it's actually very frustrating as being somebody as a DP where you come in and somebody's just like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm okay with you not knowing. However, if you didn't spend any time trying to understand some of the concepts or understanding some of the stuff, it's fine to ask questions. However, if you don't do a little bit of due diligence, it actually makes it a lot tougher, because another thing about being on set is it moves very quickly, and sometimes it's actually very hard to fully explain your way through. So it's one of those things that me as a DP, I would really hope that somebody at least spends a little bit of time trying to figure out like what camera model, what's going on. You don't need to know exactly, like if you're sitting there figuring out how it exactly plugs in, that's fine. But if I'm asking like, hey, can you get such and such cable? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, what's going to happen is I'm going to start doing the whole thing for you, and you're probably just going to watch and observe. So I think being able to have kind of a proactive mindset. And then also another thing is being alert on set. So if you're on set, it's going to be one of those things that you're probably, if you are rigging up the camera, doing some of this stuff for somebody else, they're probably going to be relying on you to be attentive during the shoot. So like, if they're out doing something, you should be keeping eyes on them to try to figure out what's the next thing that's about to happen, and try to be a little proactive in the sense of, can I be getting a lens ready, or can I be moving on a thing? It actually can cause a lot of time slow if the heads of departments are trying to look for their people trying to get stuff done. So I think what gives you a long career in film is actually trying to be attentive to what's happening on set. I think Doug could actually agree probably with, like, especially grip and gap. You're listening to other people's conversations, and I think in every crew position, you may not be able to act upon it right away, but listening to other people's conversations, whether it's the director, a DP, or whatever, is hugely helpful. And you learn how to, I won't set the whole thing up, but maybe I'll grab this one thing, or I'll get the Apple box over, or I'll get such and such. We may not use it, but you being that type of proactive to save them a couple minutes that's, I think, is actually some of what makes or breaks a career. If they're waiting, if they ask for something and then you're taking 5-10 minutes because you weren't thinking about it, or they're actually having to call like, hey, where's so-and-so? Can you do such and such? I actually think it's a small thing, but that's actually the type of stuff I think that can build a career for you on set, because you're probably only going to have the opportunity to work with somebody one time, and that's when they're going to figure out whether they're going to work with you again or not. And you may never get invited back. So like having that attentiveness on set can actually go a long way. So that's kind of the stuff around like working on a camera team. Now I'll actually go ahead and pull out the Alexa Mini so you guys can see it. So I'm gonna switch this over so that you guys can get a little bit closer up view. There you go.
You're gonna pass it around?
Unfortunately not. I mean, even like one of the things for a camera like this is that like one of the asks that I have, even if I'm working on a shoot where maybe it's gonna be pro bono or something, is I'm probably gonna ask somebody, I want you to have an insurance policy on hand because this is $40,000 worth of stuff. It's worth probably most of your cars. So one of those things is that when you're operating with this type of stuff, being aware of that as well, because it may look fairly robust and stuff. The interesting thing about using some of these parts and everything is that some pieces are really sturdy and then some pieces are not. So I think learning about camera equipment as well as you can learn a piece like this, I can probably throw them on the ground and it's fine. And nobody cares. But there's a couple other pieces that I might have that look just as strong and durable, but it's having an understanding of all the equipment of what's good or not. So this is just a base plate. That's gonna be the basics of what's gonna get the camera up and operating. So this is the body of the Alexa Mini. So it's actually pretty small, bare bones when you pull it out. There's actually only four buttons on the side for function. Only 4 buttons on the side for function, a record button, and then you have your I/O on the back with your little CFast card slot. Now the idea, what's really interesting is the Alexa Mini has traditionally, it's starting to get overcome by the Venice. It's been like the #1 camera in Hollywood for a long time. It's now getting moved up to the Alexa 35 is now getting a little bit more popular and stuff for big shows. However, this little body was actually made with the idea that it was just going to be something that was going to be put on gimbals or up on cameras. And because it's so small and versatile, it moved into a sector of being the A cam for a lot of units. So when Alexa came up with when ARRI came up with this model of camera, the original intention was not what it turned into, but it very quickly became a favorite for a massive amount of crews. The interesting thing is that this unit itself, I think, got actually used on Stranger Things itself. So I bought it directly from a guy named Caleb Heyman, who's the DP for Stranger Things. So my little claim to fame with this guy is that it shot something. Apparently it didn't get used very much, but it was on set and it got set up a few times. So that's my little claim to fame with it. So this is gonna go on the top plate here. So now one of the interesting things is that in setting up something like this, is that this is not super universal. So everybody's gonna have a different setup. So this isn't gonna be like a perfect thing for you guys. However, it's kind of a generalized, the more you get to see and get exposed to it, it should be able to help you as you move in. So the actual body itself is already rigged out with a bit of a cage. So this is a tilted cage that's already connected. It has some I/O that's already built in so that you can already connect. So these are Lima ports. So this is just power distribution. I have a little DTAP thing here, but it's already semi-built out in order to be able to move. And that's probably gonna, if you're gonna get a camera from a rental store, that's probably what's gonna happen as well, is they're probably gonna have a cage already on it, and then you're gonna build out from there. So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get some rails on here, start building this guy out. And I don't know what to do with the dead time while I do this, so you guys can just watch.
What are the top set of rails for?
So this is we're gonna build out more. So the interesting thing as well is because there's so little I/O port, or so little buttons on the side, almost all the controls for the camera is done through the viewfinder. So this is building out so we can get that viewfinder on there. So this is the viewfinder. So the interesting thing on the Alexa Mini is that this is pretty much the primary way of engaging with all of the menus and everything else. Sadly, I got to find out the hard way that this by itself is $7,000 on its own because it went down on our first day of shooting. Oh yeah, it was so stressful, so stressful. But the interesting thing about this camera, and most cameras will have a lot, especially if it's a cinema camera, it's gonna have a lot of the functions built into the camera. But interesting thing about this one, it's built onto the top. So this is the viewfinder. It's gonna connect it up onto the top here. And here again, if you are tasked with getting a camera from a rental house and you don't know what's going on, to be honest, they're almost always going to be more than welcome to show you the setup on it, because they would rather slow down and take time with you before you take it out than you to get on set. And they will field calls. So like Charlotte Film Rental, they were telling me about, like, they field calls where somebody's on set, doesn't know how to set the camera up, and then they have to send somebody out in order to save them because they don't know what they're doing. So if you do get into a scenario like that, what I would do is I would ask them, hey, can you set it up with me next to you? And then can I tear it down and can I set it up again? Because the other thing is too, is it's one thing to watch, it's a whole different thing to get in there and start doing it. So the next thing I'm gonna plug in is on the Alexa Mini. It doesn't have very much, it doesn't have an audio interface itself. And it only takes something that's called a line-in audio. So this is a little Lima port to be able to plug in. There is one audio port right on the front of the camera. I have what's called a, I think it's a A-box, or A-box for doing XLR in. The interesting thing is that most audio that you plug in is not going to give you very much, but you'd have to have a line source or a powered phantom mic. So this guy is just going to plug into the front here.
Do you usually get your sound from the sound department?
Yeah, so that's something too, is that a camera like this, it's almost nobody is going to run the finalized audio into camera. You're gonna, and this is here again, and when you start getting up to a camera like this, you're probably gonna be part of a department. So you're gonna be working with sound, and in a second, I'll show you some of the connection ports on the back that an audio person is gonna need, because they're gonna need something that's called time code sync, which that's just going to give, it's going to give a time mark onto the camera that syncs up with the audio device, and they work together. So that's getting your A box connected. So I just have it built out here. There's gonna be different spots. So the interesting thing is this is also kind of a setup where you need to figure out like what's the needs of the shoot, and you as, let's say you're the AC, you're the guy building it out. He's gonna expect you to set it up in a way that made sense to you at the very least. It may not make sense to him, but it should have some reasoning why you place things versus saying, oh, I just set everything on the camera. Like, you should have some reasoning. So my reasoning here is mostly to get it off to the side, have it accessible without extraneously building off of the camera. Next item, so this is the power distribution. So the interesting thing about this camera is that it doesn't have any power directly set on it. So it doesn't have a battery plate or anything. You have to have external power that goes on. So this guy is going to get put on there and locked into place. Actually, before I put that on, I'm gonna flip this guy around. You see, there is one critical flaw to the Alexa Mini that everybody will agree about. It is this little CFast port right here. This is the most annoying thing if you specifically get to work with this camera, because what happens is you will always need to put your battery on the back, and then you just get stuck with trying to figure out how to get it out. So if you specifically end up working with an Alexa Mini, that is going to be a small challenge right there. So actually, before I get this on too, I'm gonna go over some of the I/O on the back. So what we got here is the I/O that the Alexa Mini has. So now this is gonna be kind of something similar to most cameras as well, as they're gonna have at least semi-similar things that are coming off the back of the camera. So we've got our EF port, or EVF port, which is this for our controls. We've got SDI1, SDI2. So normally there's a priority for both of these. Is one is gonna be your AC camera, and then the other one's probably gonna be for, or one is gonna be for your onboard monitors. Second one is going to be for AC or directors or anybody else. So it's trying to understand, like, I'm gonna dedicate probably the first SDI port towards things that I need on camera, my monitor. SDI2, it's probably gonna go out to my AC, and also being able to understand the menu structure, because you're gonna try to put things onto those different screens. We got our batteries and our external controls there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that port on. Okay, and so, and also the name for this is the other bummer about working on a camera team, is there's lots of names for things that are not the technical names. If you're gonna try to look it up on Google, a lot of people call this a bebob. This is not technically a bebob. Bebob is made by ARRI itself. Do you actually know who makes the bebob itself? Yeah, maybe it's Panasonic made the original. A bebop was a specific brand of power distribution, but now everybody just calls all of the different brands, they call them a bebop plate to get your power up on. It's one of those tidbits. Hopefully it comes in handy someday. But if that term comes out and you're confused, that is completely okay. And I mean, so just example, when I did my first build out, I remember like setting it up, getting the whole thing, and then like DP's like, okay, how do you have the bebop set up? And and there's those moments too where you're like, oh, I could try to BS my way through this, but I just had to be honest, like, I'm so sorry, I don't know what it is. Like, oh, it's the battery plate on the back. But that's probably gonna happen pretty often if you are getting set up on a crew like that. So that's the battery plate on there. Some of the different type of connections, so power distribution on these cameras, they're going to tend to be what's called a Lima port. So I'm gonna show you there. Can you zoom in on these little guys right here? So these little ports are Lima ports. They have different amounts of little pins that are on the inside. You probably won't be able to see because it's real small. You have different amounts of pins for the different type of distribution. So this camera, or this rig itself inside of the camera cage, actually has power distribution going on the inside and can distribute power. The other thing that I've got here is actually D-tap ports. This is a lot more common, so any of your V-mount batteries are gonna have D-tap ports. But they are a little bit more prosumer, whereas the Lima ports are probably what you're gonna see on a little bit higher end cameras. So I'm going to plug this guy into my plate. So the idea behind this was as I've built it out quite a few times, I'm realizing, hey, I need to be able to have Lima extension out, and I need to be able to have DTAP for different things that are going on. And a lot of this comes down to me just doing it a bunch and figuring out, oh, I want one of these things. I need this little plate on the side. So here again, it's very dependent on where and who you get your setup from. Okay, so next thing. So the other way that I try to think about this is loops of what you need. So your two main things when you're setting up a camera is you need to be able to view it, you need to be able to control it, and then you need to be able to get power. So those are like the three main issues that you're gonna have as you're building out the thing. So I'm gonna start off with monitoring. So I've already got my little EVF set up. Next thing I need to do, plug this guy in. There is a little EVF connection on the back. So another thing that I would also note too is figuring out what you're going to do with cables, because you can get a lot of cables on the camera. When that starts getting too messy, it can just get really cumbersome on set. So especially another thing, if you want to get invited back, the cleaner you make a setup, it will definitely make people appreciate what you're bringing onto a shoot. So that's going to go into the EVF port. Next thing I'm going to do is get my top handle. So this is going to go up on top. There's a little plate up here. I'm going to stick it onto, lock this guy down. And then, so I've just found through experience and use, I like to have it up on top. And this is where if you are setting it up for somebody else or yourself, you can figure out where you want it, or you could just go over to the guy and say, hey, where would you like the EVF set up? Some of them may want it in different spots, but I just prefer to have it right up here on the top handle. Yeah, oh yeah, we're now going to the monitor that will be an external monitor. So this is one that you have to buy externally. Super annoying, but these small HD ones are pretty much industry standard. I think when I bought this one, it was $3,500, which is super annoying. You can get one for like $200, which is gonna be really close. I mean, just as a side note, what's super funny about, especially once you start getting into like higher end cinema gear, there's very much like, I would say it's a prudiness around equipment in the sense of a lot of things can get stuff done. However, there will be an expectation of once you start working with bigger and higher end stuff that all of the I/O around your camera is going to be high end as well. So do I need to have a monitor that's this expensive? No. Are the expectations that I will? Yes. So if I'm going to rent this out, they want to see a small HD monitor on this guy. So just going to twist that on. And some of the reasoning behind this as well is that there's quite a few times where this setup, so like this arm is kind of big and cumbersome, but there's a lot of setups where it gets all over the place. We've had a lot of setups where it's sitting up there and I want to have the ability to get this monitor way down, over to the side, some other direction. So I keep that arm on there like that. Next thing I need to think about, so once you start setting up I/O, it's not just getting it onto the camera, it's now what does this thing need? So if you have a monitor, the two things that it's going to need power, and it's going to need the input into the monitor. So right here I've got my power cable, and this is going to be really common for almost all professional cameras. You're going to have SDI cables. So I need to think about how am I going to run power to the camera. So these are LEMO connectors again. These have little pins inside. I'm going to get my power based onto the bottom. And get this guy plugged in to the LEMO port down there. And so now I have power to the monitor, but now I need to actually get the feed itself. And so as I was talking about, thinking about the dedication of these different ports on the back, I want to be able to think about number one is going to be prioritized for the operator or me as an AC. Number two is going to be going outbound. So I need to think through that, because if you just start plugging stuff in, you're like, it's the same cable, it goes into the same spot. Somebody suddenly asks like, oh, hey, can we change a menu and change a thing? And you're like, oh my gosh, did I plug it in one or two? So being slow, being methodical, thinking about, and then a lot of times it's just asking a question to the person who's who you're setting it up for, hey, which one do you want it plugged into? Let me get this guy onto the back. And as you can see, I'm already starting to run into cable management issues because they're already starting to get quite a few. So that'll be something is you can be in the midst of setting it up and you might try a few different ways of setting things up because it needs to get out of the way of something else. And so you might spend a little bit of time. So now what I've got is I've got power running to it. I've got a feed, but I don't have power to the camera. So I'm going to set up something that is called a shark fin. So this guy is for being able to put 2 batteries on to the back. The other thing with a big cinema rig like this is that you are probably going to be running for hours and hours. So this camera does not particularly turn on very quickly. So I will try to leave it on as long as I can on set. Cool thing about this plate is that once it's up, is that you can do what's called a hot swap function. Is once you have one battery on there, it has powered up the camera, and I can put my second battery on. And now camera's powered up. If one of these, if the batteries start draining, well, everything's still on. Like if you see that this monitor is on, I can go ahead and take one of these guys off, switch out to a battery that's charged up, and I can keep everything running. Because the other thing is too, is that probably if you're running a camera like this, there's probably an AC station going on. You probably have a director's monitor. You have multiple things going on. So being able to keep something like this powered up for a while is really nice. I think some of the old Red cameras had 5-minute startup times. So the original like Red 1, I think it had 5 minutes. So it's like something like that where it's like turning on and off the camera could be an extensive thing. So now we have power distribution. It's going into the it's going into my distribution center, which is built inside of the cage, going up to the monitor. Monitor's plugged in, and I will go ahead and turn the camera on as well. So we should hopefully get a black screen here in a second. Got that guy turned on. So here again, I just turned it on, but it's probably going to take solid 60 seconds or so to get turned on. Let's see, there we go. There we go, and now we're on. So, and here again, you can see this is kind of the controls are all based through this EVF. You can also get you can actually do it through your phone. Oh yeah. So these, what I have hooked up currently are gold mount batteries. So these were kind of the original camera mount batteries. I'll show you the 2 different ones that we've got. So gold mount batteries have these 3 little ports, and then V mounts, which are much more common and they're quite a bit cheaper for the same thing. Oh, we've got the gold mounts and V mounts. They've had the little V in the center. They're a newer style that have become much more widely adopted and are much cheaper. I think it's because the licensing fee is way cheaper for a V mount. They both do the exact same thing. They actually send out the same amount of power. Some people have a preference. They think that these type actually have a stronger hold. I've found that they're both about the same. However, you can get V mounts for much cheaper. So I actually hold on to a series of both because I have a little plate in here. If I run out of these batteries, I can switch over to V mounts as well. But yeah, those are the 2 different type of batteries. There's a new battery that's come out that's called a B mount battery, has higher voltages and stuff, but we won't get into that. So essentially now, camera is functional. It can pretty much get ready to go. The only thing that I'm gonna set up now is now gonna be my external IO. Things like my wireless follow focus, my wireless HDMI. So those are going to be things that are going out to external crew. But at this point, camera's pretty much ready. The only thing that we don't have is we don't have a lens. So I'm going to go ahead and stick on a lens here real quick. So these are, the other thing is that most cinema cameras are going to have what's called a PL mount. So this is a locking PL out. So you've got all sorts of different mounts. The most common one that you're going to see on a cinema rig is the PL mount. So what's interesting is it has this little, if you can see here, I'll wait for him to get focused up, has this little control right here to be able to open and close it. So that's how you get the mount off. So the lens doesn't shift at all itself. The lens is going to go straight on and straight off. And then this little twisting lever right there is what actually locks it in. So I'm going to get my camera here, or my lens over open this guy up. So now normally you really do want to do a lens swap with two people. As often as possible, you don't want to do it by yourself, because the more that sensor is exposed, that is the most expensive thing about this camera. So the longer that it's exposed to the sun or the dirt, it's a bad thing. So what you want to try to do is make lens swaps as quick as possible. So having somebody else that you can hand off to. One of the small things that I tend to ask people is when you're handing off a camera, instead of holding it like this and trying to hand it off, one of the things with lenses when you're handing them off is it's helpful if you hand it off kind of like this so that somebody can come underneath. And another thing is it's pretty common to say, hey, I've got it, because especially most likely is most of the lenses that you're going to use with a cinema camera are going to be $10,000, $20,000. Somebody in town has $35,000 lenses that are worth more than the camera itself. So it's like one of those operations, and it's one of those things, going back to that idea of even if you have a $200 lens, operating in a style when you're with multiple people in the same way that you would on a bigger set will help you just get in the mindset. So when you're going to hand it off, you're going to hand it to somebody. When you're grabbing it, you can grab it and make sure that there's that cap on the bottom. You don't want to grab the lens itself. Grab it from the bottom, because now what you got to do is you got to say, got it. They can let go of the weight. Even if for some reason you didn't have it, they let go of it too soon, you have a hand underneath, whereas like if you're handing it off and they're grabbing it in a weird way, if you do it in a little bit more procedural style, they're going to be able to kind of know what's going on. So you can hand it over, grab the bottom, say, got it. You can get the cap off, take the cap off the body. What you might even do is if there's somebody extra around, they can keep their hand in front of the sensor there. But this guy goes in, so it's going to go straight in. I'm going to make sure that it's in the little mount and lock that guy down. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of wiggle, make sure that I put it in right, because if it didn't lock in all the way, like this could still move and I could set it in. And I don't want to just walk away and have that lens fall out. Going to stick it in there, make sure it should insert into the mount. Lock it down. There we go. My lens is ready to go. So I am going to now, like one of the things that I'll do really quick. So right now it's black. Who knows what setup somebody had it in before. So this thing has what's called internal NDs. I'm going to go into the menu. You even see what's going on in the menu. Let's see. You know what? I'll move up a little bit for you. So this is the Alexa Mini menu. They've tried to set it up in a way that's as simple as possible. So most of all the functions that you're going to need is going to be on the front here. One of the things I'm going to do right now, because it's black on the screen, I have had plenty of times where I get the camera up, turn it on. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I don't see anything. Well, you just want to go through the menu, make sure that you've got some of the things like the ND filters turned off so that you can see what's going on. And there we go. We can see some of what's happening on screen. Gotta change this real quick. So now we've got the basic function of the camera going on. Doesn't look super pretty right now, but the other thing is that what you'll see right now is these are anamorphic lenses. So I have everything already de-squeezed and stuff on camera. But one of the things is, if you don't know, there's two types of lenses. There's spherical lenses, which are going to be more of your traditional. They will represent the image the same way that it's being captured. And anamorphic lenses, they actually squeeze your image sideways. And then what's going to happen is then when you get on your computer, you're going to de-squeeze it again. It kind of just gives it long. It gives it a lot of different characteristics, but one of the things is that it's a little bit older style of cinema and it just has a really interesting look. I don't want to get too far into that. Okay, so from here, I'm going to go ahead and start doing the external I/O that would be built on. Actually, is there any, I know I'm moving super quickly just because there's so many things and I don't want to keep all night. Any random questions so far about stuff?
I was just wondering with the anamorphic lens, like you get like your flares are.
Yeah, actually, I can show you probably on here. I know it's flashing quite a bit. Yeah, if you should shine a flashlight into that.
So you got some lights behind you, Jeffrey.
These lenses are tough to flare.
Yeah, they're not. They don't have a whole lot. Most of the anamorphics are going to have a little bit more care. Yeah, you see that on the bottom.
You got it right in the barrel.
Yeah. Well, actually, once I get the monitor set up, we'll be able to see it a little bit more. Yeah, I actually kind of picked these lenses because they have a little bit less characteristics.
Well, maybe you can answer this, but why not HDMI? I know locking is secure, but they're just a pain in the butt to get on.
Yeah, so the reason behind not using HDMI versus SDI is biggest thing is that they're just way less likely to get broken. So they're gonna have a lot better mounting onto whatever device it is, as well as the cable themselves are gonna be a little bit more expensive. So it's just the robustness factor. The HDMIs, actually one of the first things that happened is that this does have a little mini HDMI thing on the back here, but they can just, it's really easy to bump it. Like if you see on that camera right there, just the little HDMI port that's on the side, they stick out a bunch. So SDI cables can have a lot shorter, like this one per se, I can have it at a right angle. It's just shorter. They're a lot more robust. They're simpler to kind of, once you understand how they work, also they're gonna be more standardized. HDMI cables are super sporadic in whether they can do only 1080p, whether they can do more bit rate, less bit rate. SDI cables there's three different types that you can get. There's 3G, 6G, 12G. They're all gonna still work with the same device. They're just a lot more uniform in what they do. So I'm gonna go ahead and set up the wireless HDMI. So I have this plate over here.
And no sound goes through SDI, is that right?
No sound does actually go through
Oh, okay.
SDI, although I thought that myself. So yeah.
Isn't it just like two wires?
Yeah, it still transfers audio signals though.
Okay.
So
Well, now because it's a serial digital interface, right? It's a digital. It looks like an analog cable. But
yeah, I think it is an analog cable, but it is sending a digital signal. So. Oh, the other thing about SDI is it can run much longer than HDMI. SDI cables, I think, can run 500 feet, where an HDMI cable can only run about 50 feet before the signal degrades. So that's the other thing, is that it was used a lot more on like stadium use because you can get a lot longer runs without having to bump up the signal. So getting that in.
Just like standard things to have in your toolkit if you're going to be building out a camera.
Yeah, I would definitely say, and I love that I don't have it on hand with me right now, would be getting some type of little multi-tool, because there's going to be lots of things, especially Allen wrench toolkits, like having something like this, with a bunch of variety of different Allen wrenches on there, because that's going to be the majority of your I/O is going to be built off of.
Are they all metric or are they all?
Yeah, all metric.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Imperial would work, but you have the likelihood of potentially stripping stuff out. So. I'm gonna get this guy on. So like one of the things is, as I was building this out, this specific transmitter needed a D-tap. So I have that D-tap built in there. I'm gonna get this guy on there real quick. So now this would be one of the things, if I had more time, I would probably want to clean this up a little bit more so that I don't have as much craziness running around. But for the moment, gonna plug that in. So the two things I'm thinking about, same thing with the monitor, is I wanted to think about power and my feed in. So I'm gonna think about the same thing with this monitor unit, or this wireless transmitter, is I need to get power to it. So I'm going to get my power into the back here, and then I need to get my feed into it as well. So I'm gonna go get my SDI cable on the back.
The transmitter also accepts both SDI and HDMI? Or just
Yeah, so this one specifically can receive both HDMI and SDI.
in and out or just in?
Just in on this guy. And then like something, so this would be like, depending on the type of shoot that you're doing, is you then start thinking about loops. So like, because this has an in and out, so I could take it from the monitor, send it into the transmitter, because I want to use something else on the back. So you just have to know what the setup you're going to require is going to look like, because maybe this camera is going to sit on a stage and they want to plug into one of these ports. Now I have to make sure that I have one of these SDI cables available for it. But for this setup, I have one dedicated port for my monitor, one dedicated port for my transmitter. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy turned on, and hopefully it's going to pop up over there.
If you were to loop it out of the monitor, Jeffrey, would it affect your latency at all or no?
So, I mean, like one of the reasons that you buy a $3,000 monitor is because the latency, it does every item that you put into a chain will always add latency, and that's going to affect your AC the most. Or even I've actually had times where a director who's listening to audio direct from the audio source, if they've got too much of a delay, it's really hard for them to monitor audio. But yeah, so like something like a small HD is going to have a really fast latency, whereas like this transmitter unit is actually going to add quite a bit. So with time, you'll kind of learn the different things that will add or take away time. Wow, interesting. The different latency latency but do we have any feed? Yeah, so we have a feed up on there. So that's pretty close to a build out. The last thing that I'm gonna do on this guy is I have, so I do have, one second here. So I've got my personal monitor set up. I've got the control function of the camera set up. I've got a wireless system out. Last thing, especially if I'm an AC, is now gonna be my controls of the function of the lens itself. I do not have a very robust one. I have the old Nucleus Nano, but you're probably gonna need to make sure that a rig like this is gonna have rails on it. So I'm gonna use these small rails on the bottom. So I'm gonna rig this guy up here. And like this is gonna be one of the things that you'll just have to think through as you're doing a build out, because you can start running into really technical stuff like, can the camera distribute enough power for the follow focus that I have? So like the Tilta M units, like if you had 3 of them strung up, you now have to think about, can I distribute enough power? So that's like, you have to do research and stuff. But that's gonna be very specific to your build. So I'm gonna get this guy put into my D-tap on there. We've got it powered up. I'm just gonna calibrate just so that I can do that real quick. Most of these units, almost all the units have some type of auto calibrate function. So if you have a cinema lens on there, it's gonna go from one side to the other side.
But you need hard stops.
Yeah, you'd have to have hard stops on the lens. So like a photo lens, I'm not gonna be able to do that on. And I would probably say if you're doing a rig like this, the likelihood of you having a photo lens, really, really small. So cool. So this is the full build out of a camera. As you can see, it went from pretty small to like, this is a pretty big beast. I think that this weighs with everything about it. The body itself weighs 5 pounds. I think I weighed this last time. When it has everything on it, it gets up to 27, 28 pounds. So another thing about this is that you are probably not going to handhold it all day long. It's probably gonna sit on a tripod, or you're gonna have an easy rig. Yeah.
So how much time should this whole build take?
So I will normally try to make sure that I dedicate 45 minutes, especially if you're gonna get a new camera that you haven't done too much with, and you're building it out on set. Bare minimum 45 minutes, maybe an hour. If you really want, I would say you probably want an hour and a half, especially if you're adding stuff on, you're testing stuff out. So you really don't want to give yourself like 20 minutes and do stuff. Yeah, what was that? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like funny story. I grew up in California where it's like 76 degrees every day the whole year round. I had my first shoot over in Florida, having no idea how the difference between an air-conditioned room and the outside works. So we set up, do our interview inside the room, walk outside the door, and then suddenly the whole lens just goes super blurry. Having no idea and understanding that, oh yeah, I need to have spent like 30 minutes letting it acclimate. Even here in South Carolina, you may encounter that if you go from an air-conditioned room. So another thing would be if you are filming outside, and because what could happen is it could come from an air-conditioned truck, is you probably want to get everything out, let it acclimate to outside, get it ready to go. But I've sometimes even decided, especially with a rig like this, where who knows, like we worked in a house where I didn't know what was gonna happen when I plug into the walls and stuff. So I was like, I'm gonna make sure I'm just battery powered. I'm not gonna plug in. I mean, even something like an interesting thing is these are 150 watt battery. So I have 300 watts on the back of this guy. These batteries will last me about 2 hours. Whereas like I have an Ursa Mini, or let's say that Blackmagic camera, I could probably run that Blackmagic camera for 8 to 10 hours off of one of these batteries, whereas 2 of them will only run for about an hour to 2 hours on this guy. So that's gonna be another thing with cinema rigs. They're gonna be very power hungry. So you wanna make sure especially the rule of ABC, always be charging. That's like one of the biggest things I'm always asking somebody, did you put it on a charger? Did you put it on a charger? Did you put it on a charger? Because that's going to be one of the biggest things that you're going to run into, is they're going to eat through batteries quite a bit. Because you're probably going to leave them on as well, which is a funny thing, especially when you have a DSLR that turns on in 2 seconds. You can turn it on and off as needed. This is probably going to turn on, because the other thing is too, somebody's probably going to be looking at that monitor. Very common thing is you get it set up, somebody needs to start looking at the shot, so you'll walk away. You want to make sure this thing is powered on for a long time. Very last thing that I'll show is that if you do have something like an A box, you have to figure out how to get some type of audio to your, or get some type of audio in. So I have this little XLR here, XLR adapter to a little mini. What's really nice is I didn't realize it would work, but the little Rode Goes, they give enough audio that you can get scratch audio to the camera at least, because the only other option that I could figure out was a $700 audio unit that you attach to the side, which I was like, I would rather not spend $700 more. Instead, I was able to get this guy. Is there anything else, any other random questions about the camera? I can go through the menu system a little bit. So the other thing about a cinema rig is that you probably want to have all of those menu overlays on there, because you really want multiple people checking those settings. So like if you can see on the top left, you have the FPS, then it goes to the shutter. And actually the nice thing about this menu is that I believe Red, Sony, and ARRI have a very similar layout of their menu options on the front. So if you go to top left, you're gonna see FPS, then goes to shutter. Then you've got EL is your ISO. Don't ask me what EL means. I actually don't know. Then you have your ND. What was that? EI. Oh yeah, EI.
Exposure index. Exposure index.
Cool. You learn something every day. But essentially, it's the same thing as ISO on most cameras. You have white balance, your tint change, your battery life. Oh, an interesting thing. Do you guys see that BAT 5.1V on that monitor right there?
You don't feed it. You don't feed it. We have a clean feed here.
Oh, okay. Let me change that real quick. So this is actually one that is helpful to know about.
Now we see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I was just talking, you guys didn't see it. So if you see on there, you have your frames per second on the top left, you have your shutter, your EL, ND, white balance. On the bottom, what's interesting is, I don't know if Sony does it as well, but at least on the Alexas, if you see the battery on the bottom, it says 5.0 volts. So it's not going to tell you a percentage of how much is left, because it doesn't know, you have a ton of different battery options you can do. It is going to give you a battery voltage. So I can actually change this so that I can, it may take me a little while. I'm not gonna do it now, but it will warn you when the battery voltage gets low enough that it's getting close to the end of a battery. So now, like, one of the importances of, like, actually a very useful thing in working with a camera team is having that all displayed there. Because what do you wanna do if you're an AC or somebody working on camera team? It can slow everything down if the DP or the director has to notice, oh, okay, we need to get batteries. Can you guys go, did you charge the batteries? Did you do such and such? Are we prepared for it? If you, as somebody on the camera team, have those batteries charging, you're watching the monitor, you see if it goes down to 13.5 is normally where you'd change batteries out. But if you're watching that monitor and you're like, oh, I see it's at 14 volts right now, I want to make sure I had those batteries charged. There's nothing happening right now. I'll get them. I'll set them on the side. Nobody's asked you anything yet, but you were trying to be proactive on the fact of, I know it's going to need batteries. If they have to stop and notice that it needs batteries, you have to think about, did I charge batteries? You can actually slow things down a bunch, and every 10 minutes, 20 times in a day can make for hours. So yeah.
What are some situations where you'd have to change this, like on a flag rig, or
change
your rigging here?
Oh, changing the rigging. Yeah. So very, very often, if you are actually going to have to re-rig a camera, it is going to have to be planned out in a day. So like, per se, an Alexa Mini is a perfect camera to be able to put on like a gimbal, or it even goes on drones sometimes and stuff. However, like, you definitely want to plan that out, because it is, as you saw, I was talking through it, but it can literally take you an hour to set it all up. So it can be configured in different ways, but it is probably going to need to be a planned thing sometime in your day. Hey, we're going to have to spend 30 minutes. more likely you're probably going to have a whole nother camera. I keep extra cameras on hand so that they can be dedicated to something else.
On the camera.
So on the camera, it uses false colors, which I'm starting to move over. Have you guys ever heard of EL zones? So it's a new, if you want to show it on the top of the camera here, I'll actually show some of the room so that we can, let me move the monitor over here. There we go. So normally what you would see is actually, do you want to go to this bottom one first? So the normal exposure that you would see is false colors, which is it only has like 5 or 6 different colors. So like, let's say middle gray, it's a large value. It has a, like, I think 30% value difference between middle gray. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off. If you go up to the top screen, EL zones was recently developed by a cinematographer that has much smaller zones that it's using to represent the different exposure values. So if I go in here, I have, so another thing, small HD, it's uniform. They're all gonna have EL zones built onto the camera function. So if you see right there, it has a lot more grades within it that you can see. So it goes black as being no information, purple, you have a little bit. And if you see, I don't know if you can see it, but there's little numbers there too. It goes from, it actually shows you the stops of exposure. So middle gray is middle. White is 6 stops above. Black is 6 stops below. So it's a lot more scientific to be able to do stuff. So if you're trying to match shots and everything, EL zones is really helpful in being able to do that. And now all of these sections of your image are much more smaller versus false colors. False colors was kind of a first development in this. However, now with EL zones, it's kind of developed the ability to have much more precise exposure values and stuff. But that is in the monitor itself. Within Alexa's menu systems, you're just getting the older false colors. The last thing I'll go over is just a little bit of menu. So if you ever came down to having to control one of these guys, I will just do the minimal amount of functions on what you'd need to do. So let me scoot even more so that you can see this guy. Sweet. So if you see on your top left, you have frames per second. There's little buttons on the menu over here that you can see. So if you click on these little buttons, you can get into the menu system. It has a little scroll wheel on the side. So you can kind of go through the different settings. You click in to be able to select one. So most of what you're gonna need to be able to do on a shoot day is all gonna be on this front menu. Thankfully, the way that ARRI has set it up is that everything that's deeper in the menu, the idea is that if you're ready to go, you're ready to shoot, you should almost never have to get into this menu outside of deleting a card.
Good. So every time you.
Yeah, so it's going to, even when it gets powered down and stuff, it's always going to revert back to whatever the menu or whatever settings you were on previously.
Do you use the camera to delete the card, or if you're working with DIT, do you rely on them to delete the card?
I will normally, as an operator, do it because the camera itself is going to have a much clean. It's going to low level format it,
Right.
whereas like a DIT may just delete the card.
Yeah, like the same card number.
Yeah, exactly. So it's best to do that on camera because it's going to keep all of that stuff consistent. Then you have your,
Sync in the menu?
yeah, so you have time sync up in the top middle. So if I click on that, I can get through. So I would also say, like, let's say somebody who's local, his name is George. George actually knows these menu systems. He's been working long enough. If an audio person is good enough, they should know these and be able to get through it with you. Or you guys can jump onto a YouTube video, find out exactly what you need. Yeah.
There's simulators, menu simulators.
Oh yeah.
Apps.
Yes.
I got one for a red camera called Donna Pro.
Which is exactly, if you're gonna get on a shoot, you're using a red or something like that, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to get your hands on fumbling through that menu just to get a feel. Because what's hilarious is Caleb, who I bought this from, I remember asking him like, hey, can you pull up the hours on camera We spent 20 minutes and we couldn't figure out how to do it. It's just because he doesn't physically operate the camera in his position that he does. I found out later. You click that wait. Oh man, I knew it was the bottom one here. There we go. System info, and then you can see the operating hours. But I think it's hilarious that he's owned this camera for however long. Someone else is operating so often, he kind of knows the menu, but because he doesn't physically get in there, it was something that wasn't intuitive to him. So I think physically getting into these menus and stuff, getting an emulator, super ideal. If you go to the EL down at the bottom, if you click on the menu, you can scroll through the different ISO values. Another really good thing to learn, now a DP should be the one that knows all this stuff. However, learning what your native ISO on a camera is really valuable in understanding what's going to work well for it. Now, the other thing that we can do, there are buttons on the body for controlling the ND filters, but you can do it through here. If you go in, you have your 0.6, 1.2, 2.1. You have your different stops of ND built in there.
It's built into the camera, the ND?
Yeah, the ND filters are built
Is
in.
it electronic or do you choose them?
They're electronic, yeah.
Okay.
So once you click on it, like if I go in, you'll probably hear the sound. We won't hear it on the video, but if I go in, I change to. So that's them physically. Oh yeah, you can see it. Yeah, so they're just little plates of glass that are moving up and down, above and below.
So there are analog filters.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a polarized.
Oh yeah, no, it's not a polarized filter that's being electronically done.
And what is the native ISO settings on the Alexa Mini?
On the Alexa Mini, it's 800.
Does it have only one?
It only has one native ISO. And the other thing about an Alexa Mini, it is not a low light camera by any means. So I would say once you start getting past 12 or 1280, it's starting to get to be a really fuzzy image. So this is like one of those cameras that honestly, I love to shoot in like 400 to 800 realm. Above that, you definitely start feeling it a little bit. This is a light hungry camera. Then you got your white balance over here. Interesting thing is that you can't just like change your white balance on a fly. You have to add different ones in the, so see all these user white balances? You have to, if you have a room scenario where something's like, if we go, do you want to go to the screen really quick? Like this room is really green. It's really green on screen. So like if I wanted to dial in this room specifically, you want to go back to that menu for me again? I don't think it would be, yeah. Well, maybe. If you zoom in.
You can move the monitor closer.
But like, let's say I go and I want to try to get rid of some of that green. I already have a dedicated one, but what I would do is I'd go add to the menu. Then I would set up whatever I want, add it. If you see that one, add to list. I'm just not going to do that for now. And then I would create a whole new white balance setting. So this one is a -4 white balance to help white balance the room.
So you can't just point at a white object.
No, so this has no auto white balance to it. So this is where you probably want to be able to work with like a gaffer or somebody. So here again, a camera like this is yeah, it's going to expect that you just have more crew. You probably would hopefully have somebody with a light meter that's able to go in, say, here's what the color balance is. You can go in and set it up. The other cool thing about... not good for weddings. But I mean, like one of the things that's really nice about an Alexa is that it has its color science is really good. So even if you get, I set it at 5600 all the time, and it's super easy to go back through in the color grade and change it because of how robust their color grading is on the camera. So that's kind of the basic overview of the menu. Outside of that, that's on a day on set, that's probably all you're really gonna have to interact with is those buttons there.
Those 6 buttons.
Yeah, and they kind of designed it. They wanted to make it so if you actually need to change anything during a shoot, it should be put onto that menu, simple to get to, and easy to do.
Is there any presets for the settings, like for different shooting conditions?
Nope, you're gonna have to dial it in each day. So yeah, if you have 2 different scenarios where you need different stuff, you'd probably, maybe there is, maybe you can do some stuff with, there's what's called a SD card slot in the back. You might be able to, but within the camera itself, it's not built into there. This is gonna be pretty close to your most common setup. And this would actually be like, let's say you're setting up, this would be really good to automatically go to these settings for somebody, because this is pretty much default for the camera. 23.9 FPS, shutter at 180, ISO at 800, 5600 white balance without a tint. That's kind of your baseline for this camera. And like, so if you were to be setting up a camera like this, this would be kind of a really good baseline to start with.